He returned home after 30 years. What he found left him in tears. He hadn't been back in 30 years, and yet the letter in his hand felt like it had been waiting just as long. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. It had arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, just his name written in soft cursive, and inside, a single piece of paper with a few words that had changed everything. You should come home. There's something you need to see. No name, no explanation, just that. He sat with it for days before doing anything. He held the paper like it might tell him more if he looked at it long enough, but it never did. So eventually, without calling anyone, without telling anyone, he packed a bag and got in the car. The drive was long, not just in miles, but in memories. The further he got from the city, and the closer he got to the town he'd left behind, the more his chest felt tight. It had been 3 decades since he'd seen the streets, the trees, the signs pointing toward the place he once called home. And even though everything looked older now, quieter somehow, he still recognized it. He hadn't meant to stay away this long. At first, it was only supposed to be a few weeks. He was young, angry, and convinced that leaving was the only way to make things right. But one job turned into another, and 1 year turned into 5. After that, it got harder to go back, harder to explain the silence. Eventually, he figured it was too late. But now, here he was, driving roads he hadn't seen in half a lifetime, looking at towns that had kept moving without him. Some buildings had changed, others hadn't. The old gas station was still there. So was the church. A couple of new fast food places had popped up, but the bones of the town were the same. He passed the school he used to attend. The parking lot was full, and kids were walking in and out like nothing had changed. He wondered if any of the teachers were still there, if they'd remember his name. Probably not. 30 years was a long time. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer he got to the old neighborhood. He hadn't thought much about what he'd find. The truth was, he wasn't sure if anyone would even remember him. He wasn't sure if the house would still be standing. He wasn't sure if this was a mistake. He pulled onto the street slowly. The same trees lined the sidewalks, though they were taller now. Older, like everything else. The house came into view before he was ready for it. It was still there. Same white siding, though it was now dull and cracked in places. The shutters were hanging crooked, and the mailbox leaned a little to one side, but it was the house. His house. He parked across the street and sat there for a long time, engine running. The windows were dark. The porch light was off. There was no sign of life, no sign of who might have sent the letter. But he felt it. Something in his chest that told him this wasn't just some prank. This was real. He stepped out of the car slowly. The air smelled the same, like cut grass and dust. His feet felt heavy as he crossed the street. Each step toward the porch brought a new memory. His mother waving from the door, his father working on the front steps, his little sister chasing him across the yard. When he reached the porch, he paused. The wood creaked under his weight, just like it used to. The screen door hung open slightly. He pushed it gently and waited. No one answered. He looked around. No cars in the driveway. No lights on inside. Still, something told him to go in. He reached for the doorknob, took a breath, and turned it. It opened easily, like it hadn't been locked in a while. And just like that, after 30 years, he was home. The road leading out of town felt different on the way in than it had all those years ago when he left. Back then, It felt like freedom, like possibility. He remembered gripping the wheel of his old car, windows down, radio playing something loud and defiant. He remembered telling himself he wasn't coming back, that whatever was behind him didn't matter anymore. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. Now, 30 years later, the silence inside the car said more than any radio ever could. There was no music this time, just the sound of tires on pavement and the occasional groan of the old suspension as he made his way down familiar roads. He hadn't planned to stay. He told himself he'd drive past the house, maybe look around the old neighborhood, and then keep going. But the moment he stepped onto that porch, the moment he opened the door and crossed that threshold, something in him shifted. Something told him he needed to see it through. He'd left his bag in the trunk. He hadn't expected to need it. But after standing in that doorway and looking into the past, he turned around, popped the trunk, and brought it inside. He didn't know where to put it, so he set it down in the hallway, just beside the old coat rack that still stood in the same place. The house was quiet, not just silent, but settled, like it had been waiting. Dust had settled on the shelves. The furniture was covered in old sheets, thin with age, but everything was still where he remembered it. The picture frames on the walls, the worn couch in the living room, the lamp with the chipped shade next to his father's old chair. It felt like time had passed everywhere except inside these walls. He walked slowly through the house, each room bringing back something he thought he'd forgotten. The kitchen still had the same tiles, yellowed now with time. The fridge was empty but still plugged in, humming softly. A calendar hung near the pantry. The year was old, too old. No one had touched it in years. Upstairs, he found his room just as he'd left it. Posters still on the wall, his old baseball glove on the shelf, a shoebox under the bed with ticket stubs and folded notes from high school. It was like a museum of a life paused mid-sentence. He sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of it all sink in. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He wasn't even sure what had brought him back, aside from that letter. But something was here. Something waiting to be seen or understood. He opened the nightstand drawer and found an old photograph. It was him, his mother, and his little sister, standing in front of the house. He must have been 10. He stared at it for a long time. His mother's arm was around him, her smile soft, like she already knew he was going to leave one day and didn't want to hold on too tight. Downstairs, the front door creaked as a gust of wind passed through. He went to close it and noticed a small stack of unopened mail on the floor just inside the door. Most of it was junk, but one envelope stood out. Same handwriting, same soft cursive. He opened it slowly, hands steady but heart beating fast. "You made it. I knew you would. Go to the attic." No name, no date. But it was recent. The paper didn't feel old, and the ink hadn't faded. He looked up toward the ceiling, toward the narrow hallway upstairs where the attic pull-down sat flush against the ceiling. He hadn't been in the attic since he was a teenager. He used to hate it up there. Dusty, cramped, full of things that didn't belong to anyone anymore. But now, it felt like the only place he needed to be. He climbed the stairs slowly, stopping under the pull-down. He reached up and tugged the string. The ladder came down stiffly, with a low groan. He looked up into the darkness above and waited. He didn't know what he would find. He only knew he was supposed to. The attic smelled like time. He climbed the ladder carefully, one step at a time, his hand gripping the rail tighter than he meant to. The wood creaked beneath his feet. It always had. But this time it felt different. Louder, maybe, or just heavier. Like every sound meant something. The last time he'd been up there, he was 17. He'd been looking for an old baseball bat or maybe a box of Christmas lights. He couldn't remember exactly. What he did remember was how much he hated it. The heat, the dust, the way it made him feel like the walls were closing in. He used to rush through it, get what he needed, and climb down as fast as he could. Now, he took his time. The attic was dark at first. Only the light from the hallway below reached up through the opening. He stepped onto the floor, reached for the pull chain he remembered hanging from the rafters, and gave it a gentle tug. The single bulb above flickered once, then came to life. It was all still there. Boxes, old furniture, a few suitcases stacked in the back, an old rocking chair, a broken lamp. Dust coated everything, soft and thick, like it had been gathering for years without anyone noticing. He moved slowly, eyes scanning the space, trying to understand why he'd been told to come here, what he was supposed to find. The first few boxes held the usual things: photo albums, books, old dishes wrapped in newspaper. He recognized some of them. A few were marked in his mother's handwriting. Summer '91. Kara's school papers. Christmas decorations. He opened one and found a box of letters tied together with twine. They weren't addressed to him. They looked like letters his mother had written but never sent. Some were to family members. Some were to no one at all. She wrote about the seasons, the neighborhood, the garden. She wrote about missing someone. Always missing. He sat back on an old chest and flipped through a few pages, reading her words like she was still here, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. Her voice came through in the way she wrote. Calm, steady, honest. She hadn't expected him to read them. But now that he was, he felt like he was seeing her for the first time in years. In the corner of the attic, near the sloped wall, he noticed a smaller box tucked behind a trunk. It didn't have a label, just a layer of dust and a single object resting on top. A key. He picked it up, felt the weight of it in his hand. Old. Brass. Worn smooth from use. He didn't know what it opened. Inside the box were more photographs. Not posed ones, not the kind you hang on the wall. These were snapshots, candid, unsteady. His mother in the garden, his sister riding a bike, him sitting on the porch steps with a book in his lap. Pictures of moments he didn't even remember, but that someone had thought were worth saving. Underneath the photos, there was a notebook. The pages were worn, the spine frayed. He opened it gently. Inside were journal entries, his mother's again. But these were different from the letters. These were for her. Private. Raw. She wrote about him. About the day he left. About how quiet the house became. About the way she still made his favorite meals on his birthday, even though he never came home to eat them. She hadn't been angry. Not once. Just sad. She hoped he was okay. She hoped he had found peace. And every few pages, she ended the same way. I believe he'll come home. He closed the notebook carefully and set it in his lap. The attic didn't feel so dark anymore, or so cramped. He wasn't rushing to get out now. He was just sitting there, still, letting the weight of her words sink in. He looked back at the key. There had to be something it belonged to, something she'd left for him to find, not out of guilt, not out of bitterness, but out of love. It was quiet again, except for the faint sound of the wind outside. The house didn't groan the way it used to. It just stood there, holding on to the things that had been left behind. And now, after all these years, so was he. He stepped outside for the first time that day, just after noon. The air was warm, still, the kind of quiet that only small towns seem to carry. Not silent, but settled. No sirens, no rush. Just birds, wind, and the low hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. The house looked different in the daylight, less haunted, still worn down, but not forgotten. He stood on the porch for a moment, taking it in again, like he had the day before. It didn't feel like a stranger's house anymore. It didn't quite feel like home either, but it was something in between. He walked down the front steps and looked up and down the street. It wasn't busy. It never had been. A few houses looked newer, fresh siding, clean yards. But others looked like they had stood still, same as his. And here and there, he spotted faces he half recognized. People older now. People who might have known his mother, or maybe even remembered him. Across the street, a man stood by his mailbox, watching him. He looked to be in his 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray hair, clean shirt, tucked into his jeans. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just looked at him for a long moment before heading back into the house. A few doors down, someone came out with a dog. The leash clinked against the collar, and the dog barked once before settling into a trot. The woman holding the leash paused when she saw him. Her eyes squinted, like she was trying to place him. "You're June's boy," she said after a beat, walking a little closer but keeping her distance. He nodded. "Yeah, I guess I still am." "I thought so." She shifted her weight. "Wasn't sure at first, but there's something in the face. You look like her." He wasn't sure what to say to that. He'd heard it before, but not in a long time. "I'm Karen," she said. "Lived down the street a few houses. I used to walk past your place every morning. Your mom, she always waved, even when she got older, always out in the yard with her hands in the dirt." He nodded. "Yeah, she loved that garden." Karen smiled, then looked down at the dog. "We were all real sorry when she passed. A lot of people came to the service. It was small, but it meant something." He hadn't known there had been a service. Hadn't known there had even been a burial. Part of him had always assumed he'd just missed it all, like he'd been too late for everything. He wondered who had made the arrangements, who had stood beside her in those final moments. Karen hesitated, then said, "She talked about you a lot. Said you'd come home one day." He felt his chest tighten. "She said that?" "Yeah, not to everyone. But I think she believed it." They stood there for a while, not saying much, just letting the space fill in what words couldn't. Eventually, Karen gave a small nod and tugged gently on the leash. "Well, I'm glad you came back, even if it took a while." He watched her go, the dog trotting beside her. Back at the house, he sat on the porch steps and looked out at the street. A few more cars passed by. A couple of kids rode their bikes down the sidewalk, shouting to each other without a care in the world. It felt strange, being noticed again, being remembered. These weren't people he'd kept in touch with. They weren't friends from school or family he'd stayed close to. They were just neighbors. People who'd lived alongside his family. People who'd seen him grow up, disappear, and now come back. He didn't know if it mattered to them, but it mattered to him. Later that afternoon, he walked to the corner store. The old one was gone, replaced with something cleaner, newer. But the man behind the counter looked up as he came in and said his name like no time had passed. "I'll be," the man said. "Didn't think I'd ever see you back here." He nodded. "Didn't think I'd come back either." Word traveled fast in small towns. By evening, 3 more people had stopped by the house. Some just waved. One woman left a covered dish on the porch. No note, just food. He sat on the steps again as the sun dropped low behind the trees. The streetlights flickered on. The town hadn't forgotten him. And even if they didn't know the whole story, they hadn't shut the door on him either. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was alone in it. The room hadn't changed. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking. The light came through the window in thin lines, casting soft shadows on the walls. The bed was made, sheets faded but clean, pillow still fluffed. It was the same blanket he'd slept under as a teenager, same lamp on the nightstand, same books on the shelf. It was like someone had kept it ready. He walked in slowly, his footsteps quiet against the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly like dust and something else. Maybe lavender, maybe just time. He touched the edge of the dresser, ran his fingers across the top. His mother used to place folded laundry there. T-shirts, socks, jeans. He'd always meant to put them away, but usually left them sitting too long. The closet door creaked when he opened it. Inside were some old shirts still on hangers, a jacket he hadn't seen since high school, a pair of shoes on the floor with a layer of dust over them. He crouched down, reached for the shoebox tucked in the back corner. Inside were small things. An old wallet, a class ring, a folded note that had once been taped to the fridge, his mother's handwriting. Dinner's in the oven. Be safe. Love, Mom. He sat down on the edge of the bed and read it again. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. She'd saved it. All these years, she'd kept it. There were pictures under the note. Some of him as a kid. One with scraped knees, one in a baseball uniform, one sitting on the front steps with a scowl he remembered well. And then others, ones he hadn't known about. His mother working in the garden, his sister holding a birthday cake. A few photos of the house itself, small, quiet moments that didn't seem important until now. He leaned back against the wall, holding one of the photos in his hand. It was strange. The more time he spent in the room, the smaller it felt. Not in a bad way, just smaller, more personal. He remembered laying there at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what else was out there, wondering how far he'd have to go to feel free. He thought he'd find that freedom by leaving, and maybe he had, for a while. But sitting here now, surrounded by pieces of a life he'd left behind, he couldn't help but wonder if maybe he'd spent all those years trying to get back to something he didn't even know he'd missed. On the nightstand, next to the lamp, was a book. He picked it up. Inside was another folded note. It wasn't long, just a few lines. If you ever come back, I hope you find peace here. I never stopped loving you. Mom. He didn't move for a while, just sat there with the note in his hand, staring at the window as the light slowly shifted. She'd kept this room the same, not because she thought he'd move back in, not because she was holding on to the past, but because she'd believed he might return. Not just to the house, but to himself. He stood up and opened the top drawer of the dresser. Inside were his old notebooks from school, a couple of pens, and a worn-out cassette tape. Written on the label in her handwriting were the words, his favorite songs. He didn't have a cassette player, but just seeing it brought something back. Late nights, the sound of music coming through the wall, her knocking gently on the door and telling him to turn it down, then smiling when he didn't. He placed the tape back inside and closed the drawer. There wasn't much more to find, not in the usual sense, but that wasn't the point. This room had waited, not just as a space, but as a reminder of who he'd been, of what had mattered, of someone who had loved him quietly, steadily, even in his absence. He turned off the light and stood there in the doorway once more. It didn't feel like a place frozen in time anymore. It felt like a place that had always made room for him to return. He found the box by accident. It was tucked behind a stack of blankets in the hallway closet, one he hadn't opened yet. He'd been looking for a hammer or nails, something to fix the loose porch step that had started wobbling again. But when he pulled the blankets out, there it was. A small wooden chest, no bigger than a carry-on, with brass hinges and a tiny keyhole. He didn't recognize it. It wasn't something he remembered seeing growing up. It didn't look like it belonged in the house. But when he picked it up, he felt the weight of it. Not just the wood and metal, but something else. Like it was holding more than just items. Like it was holding something that had been waiting for him. He brought it to the kitchen table and set it down. Then he remembered the key. The one from the attic. He got up, went to his bag, and pulled it from the side pocket where he had tucked it away. He hadn't known what it was for. He hadn't even planned to use it. But now, looking at the keyhole, he didn't have to wonder. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked once, and the lid lifted with a soft creak. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bundled together by year, each tied neatly with a ribbon. His name written on every envelope in the same familiar handwriting. He didn't understand at first. He reached for the one on top and unfolded it gently. It was dated just a few months after he had left home. Her voice came through immediately. "Dear Evan, I hope this letter finds you somehow. I don't know where you are or if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to talk to you anyway. I made your favorite for dinner tonight. Spaghetti with garlic bread. I only made one plate, though. It's hard getting used to cooking for just one." He stopped reading. His hand rested on the edge of the table as his eyes fell to the rest of the box. Every envelope, every piece of paper, every word. She had written them all to him, but she had never mailed a single one. He opened another, then another. They covered everything. The day his sister graduated. The time the neighbor's dog had puppies. The first time she had to fix the sink on her own. How quiet the house was. How she still made sure to water the plants. How she would sit out on the porch some nights and imagine he was about to turn the corner and come home. She never blamed him. She never asked why he'd left or why he hadn't written back. She just kept writing, kept believing. Some of the letters were only a few lines. Others filled pages. One included a newspaper clipping from a story about a boy who'd come home after many years away. She'd circled a line and written in the margin, "This reminded me of you." He had to stop after a while. His hands were trembling. The sun had gone down without him noticing. The kitchen was dark except for the small light over the stove. He sat there in silence, the letters spread out in front of him, and felt something break open inside him. Not pain, not regret, just the weight of everything he hadn't known. She had been with him, in her own way, the entire time, even when he thought he was alone, even when the years piled up and the phone stayed silent and the letters never came. She had been writing, waiting. He thought of all the things he could have said, all the calls he didn't make. But in that moment, he realized something simple and quiet. She had never stopped being his mother, even in the silence, even in the absence. She hadn't needed a reply. She just needed him to know she hadn't forgotten. He gathered the letters gently, placing them back in the box one by one. Not because he was done with them, but because they deserved care. He wasn't ready to read them all yet. He didn't need to. The message was already clear. She had loved him without needing anything in return, and now, after all these years, he had finally heard her. The headstone was smaller than he expected. The cemetery sat just beyond the edge of town, past the last row of houses and the old wooden fence that had started to lean. The gravel road curved through the gate and into rows of markers that stretched out quietly across the grass. No noise, no movement. Just wind in the trees and the distant hum of the highway. He parked the car near the entrance and stepped out. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he walked. He didn't bring flowers. He thought about it, but it didn't feel right. He wasn't here for appearances. He just wanted to see her, to be near her. He didn't have to ask where she was buried. One of the neighbors had told him earlier that morning. "Section C, under the oak tree," the man had said. She picked that spot, said it felt peaceful. He found it easily. There was no statue, no bench, no grand inscription, just a simple stone, weathered a little, her name carved clearly across the surface. June Matthews, 1949, 2014. Always waiting. He stood there for a long time. He didn't cry right away, not because he didn't feel anything, but because the moment felt too still, too full, like even breathing too hard might break something. The grass around the grave was trimmed. Someone had taken care of it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe the groundskeeper. But it hadn't been forgotten. Someone had made sure she was remembered. He crouched down slowly and placed his hand on the edge of the stone. His fingers traced her name without thinking. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. He didn't plan what to say. He didn't rehearse anything. He just spoke. Slow, steady. Not to be dramatic, not to get anything off his chest, but just because it felt like time to tell the truth. "I thought about coming home a lot," he said. "I just never knew how. And the longer I stayed away, the harder it got. I told myself you were probably better off not hearing from me." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "But I was wrong." The wind moved gently through the trees. A leaf drifted down and landed near the stone. "I found the letters," he said. "All of them. Every single one. I don't know why you never sent them. Maybe you knew I wasn't ready, or maybe it was enough for you to just write them." He sat down on the grass, legs crossed, his arms resting on his knees. "You were always there, even when I wasn't, even when I tried to forget everything. You didn't stop caring. You didn't stop hoping." His voice was quieter now. "I wish I could have told you thank you. I wish I could have come back while you were still here. But you probably knew that. You always knew things before I did." There was no answer. No sound except the breeze through the oak leaves above him. But still, he felt something. A sense of being seen, of being known. Not judged, not blamed, just remembered. He leaned back on his hands and looked up at the sky. It was clear, bright, the kind of day she would have liked. "I'm home now," he said. "I don't know for how long, but I'm here, and I'm going to take care of the house, maybe clean up the garden, maybe fix that porch step you used to tell me about." He smiled a little, just for a second. "I think I get it now. Why you waited. Why you kept writing. You didn't need me to be perfect. You just needed me to remember who I was." The wind picked up again, soft but steady. He stayed for a while longer, not speaking, not moving much, just sitting with her, letting the silence say what didn't need to be spoken out loud. When he finally stood, he brushed off his pants and placed his hand once more on the headstone. "Thank you," he said. Then he turned and walked back to the car. Not rushed, not heavy, just still. Something in him had shifted. Not everything, not all at once, but something small, something real. And for the first time in years, it felt like the beginning of peace. The bell over the door still made the same sound. He stepped into the diner just after 9. The morning rush had passed, but the place wasn't empty. A few people sat at the counter, a couple of booths filled near the windows. The coffee pot hissed behind the counter, and the scent of bacon and toast hung in the air like it always had. He stood just inside the door for a second, letting his eyes adjust, letting the memory settle. The layout hadn't changed. Counter to the left, booths to the right, kitchen behind the swinging door in the back. Even the checkered floor tiles were the same. Faded now, scuffed, but still holding their place. A woman behind the counter turned around. For a second she didn't react. Then her eyes narrowed slightly, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Well, I'll be Evan Matthews." He smiled back, quietly. "Hey, Linda." "I thought that was you," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Didn't believe it when someone said you were back in town. I figured they were just stirring up old talk." "Nope, it's me." She stepped around the counter and gave him a quick, warm hug. The kind that didn't need words. The kind that said she still remembered who he was, even after 30 years. "You want your old booth?" she asked, nodding toward the back corner. He looked over. It was empty. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be nice." He walked slowly, sliding into the seat, his hands resting on the table like they used to. Linda brought over a mug and filled it with coffee before he could ask. "Cream and 2 sugars, right?" He nodded, surprised she remembered. "Some things don't change," she said. "Not around here." He took a sip. It tasted exactly the same. From the counter, someone called out his name. He turned and saw a man standing near the register, older now, heavier, but still familiar. He couldn't place the name, but the face was there. From high school, maybe. Football team. They'd sat next to each other in history class. "Didn't think I'd ever see you in this place again," the man said, walking over. "Didn't think I'd be back," Evan replied. They shook hands, and a few others nearby turned to look. A couple nodded. One man raised his coffee cup in a silent greeting. No one asked questions. No one pushed for answers. Linda came back with a plate. Eggs, toast, a little bacon on the side. "On the house," she said. "I figure this place owes you at least one breakfast." He looked at her, surprised. "Your mom used to come in here almost every Thursday morning," she said. "Sat in your booth, ordered tea, brought a book sometimes just sat quiet." He nodded slowly. "She'd always say, this was Evan's favorite spot. He liked the light in the mornings." "I did," he said. "Still do." Linda placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "She loved you. Never stopped. You know that, right?" "I know," he said softly. "I didn't for a long time, but I do now." The diner stayed quiet for a bit after that. People went back to their meals. The sound of clinking silverware and low conversation filled the air again. But something had shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet recognition that someone had returned. He ate slowly, not because he was trying to stretch the moment, but because he didn't want to rush it. Every bite tasted like it used to. Every detail around him brought back something small. By the time he finished, Linda had refilled his coffee twice. She didn't hover. She didn't ask anything else. Just let him be there. Let him belong. As he stood to leave, he reached for his wallet. "Put it away," she said, shaking her head. He smiled. "All right." He walked out of the diner and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up and down the street. It was a quiet town. It always had been. But today, It didn't feel so far away from everything. Today, it felt like he wasn't a stranger. And even if nothing else came from it, no big conversations, no dramatic reunions, he'd had a hot meal, a kind word, and a place at the table. Sometimes that was enough. The porch steps creaked under his weight, just like they always had. He lowered himself down slowly, the sun dipping low in the sky behind him, casting long shadows across the yard. The house stood quiet, still. Not empty, but resting. It had given him everything it could. Now it just waited. He wrapped his hands around a mug of coffee, the same one he'd used that morning. It had gone cold, but he didn't care. He wasn't drinking it for the taste. He just liked the way it felt in his hands. Solid, familiar. The street was calm. A few porch lights had come on. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car passed now and then, slow and familiar, like it belonged there, like everything did. It had been a week since he found the letter. A week since he opened the front door and stepped back into a life he thought he'd left behind for good. In that time, he had read maybe a dozen of the letters from the box. There were still many more to go. Some days he could only get through one. Other days, none at all. But that was all right. He wasn't rushing. The house felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but steadier. He'd cleaned out the fridge, replaced a couple of light bulbs, swept the porch. It wasn't a full repair job, but it was a start. He trimmed the hedges too. Not because anyone asked him to, but because she used to care about how the front yard looked. It felt like something worth doing. He looked out at the street and saw a boy riding his bike down the sidewalk. Couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. He reminded Evan of himself. He used to ride that same path, racing imaginary opponents, trying to beat some invisible record. The boy glanced over as he passed, then looked away. Just a neighbor. Nothing more. Evan leaned back against the step. His legs stretched out in front of him, his shoes tapping gently against the wood. He remembered sitting in that same spot as a teenager, angry at the world, convinced no one understood him. Back then, he thought getting out was the only way to start over. He didn't realize that starting over sometimes meant going back. He wasn't sure what would come next. He hadn't decided if he was staying for good. But for now, he didn't need to decide. For now, it was enough to sit on that porch and breathe the same air he used to breathe, to look out at a street that had watched him grow up, leave, and return. He thought about her. She wasn't coming back. That part still stung, but somehow she didn't feel gone either. The notes, the letters, the room, she had left pieces of herself everywhere, and now those pieces didn't feel like memories. They felt like presence. He had spent years thinking silence meant separation. That distance meant he was forgotten. But that wasn't how she loved. She had loved him in quiet ways, steady ways, in kept rooms and handwritten pages, in a key hidden in the attic, in a grave under an oak tree that faced the morning sun. And now, he carried that with him. The porch light flickered on beside him. It was on a timer. She had set it that way years ago. He never liked it much, but she said it made the house look warm to people passing by. Said it told the world someone was home. He reached over and touched the railing. It was chipped and splintered in spots. He'd fix that. Not tonight, but soon. He didn't feel like he had to run anymore. He didn't feel like he had something to prove. He looked out at the street one last time. Nothing remarkable. Just a quiet evening in a quiet town. But this time, it didn't feel like a place he had escaped from. It felt like a place that had waited, and he was finally ready to be there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.